So through hard-won wisdom, and I'm not even saying that this was accrued to me at the beginning of FDR, but I have learned it over the years, painfully and reluctantly and so on. I have learned this a very painful truth. And what I do now, when I encounter somebody who claims to be about freedom, well, first thing I ask myself is, are they a counterfeiter? Are they talking about freedom for parasitical reasons? Or are they really dedicated to freedom, to virtue, to truth, to honesty? Are they really dedicated to these things? And that's my first question. And my first suspicion is that it's all just a bunch of mouth-breathing noise designed to hook people in, designed for vanity, designed for exploitation, and so on, right? Are they really, really into freedom, or is it just a bunch of noise that they're making in order to pat themselves on the back and to get money from people, whether it's ad money or promise things to people that simply can't be achieved, like freedom through politics, do they have any real currency, or is it all mere counterfeiting? That is my very first question. And I must be honest with you that I think the majority of people in the freedom movement are not so much with the actual devotion to and dedication to freedom, right? But if you're only really interested in freedom in the areas that you cannot possibly control, like changing state policies and so on, but you don't actually exercise freedom in your own life, even basic freedoms like your breath is really unpleasant, like please get it looked at, that to me is not liberty. That is the opposite of liberty. I mean, that's no interest in liberty. That's just liberty as distracting noise to make yourself feel something.
And, I guess we have a topic, sweetie, don't we?
Why don't you go ahead?
Well, for those who have been following some of the DFU drama that Christina and I have been going through, more so Christina than myself, Christina has not seen her parents for about 3 years.
It'll be 3 years at the end of this month.
And we've had relatively little contact with them. They've sent a couple of letters and they've left some angry voicemails, but for some reason that we can't quite figure out because we don't know what's going on. And this has been the case where, surgeries have occurred and we've hung tough and all this, that, and the other. But now we are getting the drive-bys, and not just the drive-bys, but the coming up to the porch and aggressively and repeatedly ringing the doorbell. And so, brave philosophers that we are, we hide upstairs. And fortunately, we only have one car in the driveway, so it doesn't. And it was by pure chance. They came by last weekend, and it was just by pure chance because we weren't expecting them. Somebody rang the doorbell, and I thought it was somebody I was working on the fence with, and came down and just happened to see that it was Christina's mom, and she hadn't cupped her hands around the window, so she couldn't see into the house, I guess, at that point. So she didn't see me. So then we hid in the, and unfortunately, because we have an open concept house, if they were to go around the house during the day, they can see into every room. So there's no particular place to hide downstairs. And if they happen to be looking in, when we go upstairs, they can see us go upstairs because, as I said, it's a pretty open concept house. So yesterday, Christina was driving back from somewhere and saw their car and couldn't tell their sort of make and color of car. And
and they're coming back now.
Are they coming back?
I'm pretty sure that's them.
Do they normally drive with their lights on?
The lights are automatic lights.
Oh yeah, yeah. So we have this parental invasion that's going on at the moment, and they just sort of rang the doorbell as we were getting ready for the show. Christina came upstairs, and now we're upstairs where we can't be seen, and so we have a parental eruption on our hands, and it's amazing, of course, how this stuff can just start up after a couple of years of not seeing them. but the defood process is long and involved and tends to occur in waves, if that makes any sense. So from that standpoint, it is a difficult thing. So just sort of pointing this out, A, to share, and sort of B, to point out that it is not an easy process. And we are going to have to send them we could try sending a letter, but they seem to be, if they came by last weekend and they came by twice this weekend, well, sooner or later, they're just going to catch us if they keep coming. I mean, right, that's just going to happen, right? I didn't want it to happen today because we've got a show to run. But sooner or later, they're going to catch us, and then the fireworks are really going to fly. And that's not the end of the world, because the only conversation will be, get off our property or we'll call the cops. That's the only conversation. There's not going to be, because they're going to be, oh, why, and what did we do, and how can we make it better, and all this, that, and the other. And there is, of course, no possibility of that conversation going forward in any kind of productive way. So it is going to be a pretty savage and unpleasant scene, which, of course, you would naturally expect when you have defood, because if it wasn't going to be a savage and unpleasant scene, then we wouldn't have defood. So this is just the inevitability of what occurs in these kinds of situations. And so I just sort of wanted to share with you what's going on. This is a sad, sad state to be in your 70s, but this is the choice that people make, to be religious, to be cultural bigots. This is the choice that people make, and this is where it ends up for them. And there's nothing that can be done other than to hold the fort as best we can and wait for this particular storm to subside. And it will recur. There will be another set of storms when one of them gets sick. And, it's hard to get out of a cult, It's hard to get out of a cult. The family is the cult. I mean, we're just trying to solve it from this standpoint. Steph, would you recommend that somebody who defoos just move to another place far away from foo members? I mean, that's a tough question. I don't have a particularly strong answer. I would say that it can be easier, but is it disruptive, right? I mean, we've bought a house. Are we going to sell the house and move? And where are we going to move to, right? Because Christina is bound geographically according to her license, which, along with you wonderful listeners, is my lifeline to food, sustenance, and shelter. So we don't have that particular option. We could move to some other house and spend a month or two selling this house, go and buy another house, but basically we're talking hundreds of hours of work to avoid a situation. It will simply come down to I'm not going to move because there are bad people who are knocking on our door. But what I will do is, and that's why it's so great that I'm working from home, that we will simply tell them to get off our property, and if we have to involve the police and get a restraining order, we'll have to do that. I mean, it's a shame, but of course, this is one of these situations that you would expect them to be invasive and ugly and unpleasant about this, because otherwise we'd still have them in our life, right? But no, I'm not going to move because there's a couple of elderly Greek people on my trail.
Steph and I talked about this for quite a while yesterday and over the last week or so, because when they drove by last week for the first time, I think they did a drive-by about a year and a half ago. They just actually drove by, but they didn't ring the bell. I happened to see them through the window. But last week was the first time they actually rang the doorbell. And since then, I've sort of been walking on eggshells, looking out the window, and, when the doorbell rings and I'm not expecting a client, it's a little freaky. But I honestly think the best way to handle this at this particular point is we could send them a fax and say, please don't drive by. I think they do know that I work from home, so I don't think that they're going to try and come by during the day when I have clients. I don't know that they're aware that I also see clients in the evening, so that's a possibility. They might actually try to come by one evening, but I will have clients there, and I don't think that they have the balls to actually interrupt my work. I think they just have too much social
anxiety about that.
Yeah, anxiety about that. And I don't think that they would do that. I do think that the best thing for us to do is just to, at this particular point, just ignore them. I had someone else who was harassing me with phone calls that I had sort of separated
A friend,
from
right?
a friend, and the phone calls were incessant, and
Yeah,
they
a
were
couple a day for
couple
weeks.
a day, home phone number, and to the point where we had to turn the home phone off because it was interrupting my sessions, and I would have to turn the ringer off on my business phone as well because it was just ringing incessantly. And so I just said, I mean, the principles of extinction are if you don't respond, the behavior will cease after a period of time. There might be a little bit of a flurry of activity, but it will eventually just cease, and that's exactly what happened. So I'm hoping this will happen with my parents. I somehow think that they are going to be a bit more persistent than my friend was.
So this kind of situation is ugly, unpleasant, stressful. But this is how the world changes, not through Ron Paul, not through articles, not through even posting on the Free Domain Radio board, though it's good practice, not through listening to podcasts, but making these kinds of decisions in your life. This is philosophy in action, and it is not pretty, though it is essential.
Yeah, what makes it hard also is that it doesn't feel right for some reason. I mean, yeah. Well, to say to your family, well, bye bye. I don't know. It doesn't feel right for some reason.
Well, what feels wrong about it?
It feels mean or something, or harsh.
Right.
You don't recognize that, or yeah, you had a maybe different relationship, but
No, I mean it's not fun for sure. It's a very difficult thing to do, right? Do you think that your parents think it's mean, or do you think that it's mean if you have people who are irrational and who support doctrines that would get you killed if they put them into practice? There are statists, right, who if you don't pay the money that they say you should pay, then they support you being thrown in jail. And if you resist that, they support you getting shot, right?
mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
So clearly, to hang around with people who think that you should get shot is not good, right? Because the reason you're worried about politics is because you're not able to convince anyone in your life. And the reason that you're not able to convince anyone is that on the one hand, you passionately believe in these ideals, but on the other hand, you don't want to put them into practice because you're afraid that you might end up alone. But being alone is better than being with people who want you dead. And right now, you're worse than alone. There's a little hump that you have to get over, right? Which is to take these ideas really seriously. And I know that you do, but there's a difference between knowing them in your head and putting them into practice in your life.
Mm.
And if you say, well, I don't want to put these ideals into practice in my personal life, that's fine, but that means, of course, that you're never going to help change the world. In fact, what you're really doing, if you believe these things and speak about them but never act on them, is you're discrediting these ideas for everyone else. You make my job harder and the job of other people harder, right? Because people say, well, people have these libertarian ideas, but they don't really mean anything, right?
Mm.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I kind of see it, but I also wonder, will I end up hiding on my attic and my parents ring the doorbell? That also, it
You might.
doesn't.
You might. You might. I mean, absolutely. I was, as you know, I just did it last week. You might. You might.
That also doesn't sound free.
And yeah, every now and then I have to hide in my attic.